Welcome to Inside the Philippines Journals, the channel where we sit down with the men and women who left everything familiar behind and went looking for a different way to grow old. Some of them found it. Some of them found something else entirely. Most of them, if we're honest, found a bit of both. Today's story comes from a man named Wayne. He's 62, born and raised in the southeast of London, and he spent 40 years of his life up scaffolding on building sites from Croydon all the way out to Canary Wharf. Hands like old rope, a head for heights, and, by his own telling, a good nose for people trying it on. He'll tell you he's not the sort of man who gets fooled. And for the most part, he's right. But something happened to Wayne a couple of years back that made him look hard at the rest of his life. And the decision he made after that took him 10,000 miles from the only city he'd ever known. What he found out there surprised him. Some of it warmed him right through, and some of it very nearly cost him more than money. I won't tell you how it goes. That's his to tell. But if you're watching this, do us a favor and drop a comment telling us where in the world you are right now, because it genuinely amazes us how far these stories travel. Share your own if you've got one. And if this channel means anything to you, hit like and subscribe so more people find their way here. Here's his story, in his own words. Right. Where do I start with this? I suppose I start with the latter, because that's the honest place. 40 years I went up scaffolding. You don't last 40 years up the poles by being a mug, let me tell you. You learn to read a site the minute you walk on it. You learn which brickie's going to be trouble, which foreman's lying about the schedule, which lad's been on the beer at lunch and shouldn't be trusted near a clip. Reading people kept me alive up there. Genuinely. A wrong 'un on a scaffold is a dead man walking, and he'll take you with him. So I got good at spotting them. 50 feet away, I could tell you who was straight and who wasn't. I was proud of that. Maybe too proud, as it turns out, but we'll get to that. My wife, Carol, she passed 6 years ago now. Cancer. It was quick, which everyone tells you is a blessing, and I suppose it is compared to the alternative. But quick doesn't feel like a blessing when you're the one left in the flat, with her coat still hanging by the door. We never had kids. Wasn't for want of trying, it just never happened. And by the time we'd made our peace with that, we'd sort of become each other's everything instead. So when she went, that was it. There was no one else. Just me. A one-bedroom flat in Sydenham, and a telly I kept on all night because the quiet was worse. I carried on working. What else do you do? Up at 5:30, flask of tea, the same site radio, the same banter with lads 30 years younger who called me Granddad and meant it fondly, mostly. And that was the shape of it. Work all week, then a weekend that was just 2 empty days with the telly on, a fry-up on my own, a pint at the Dolphin, where I'd nod at a few faces and go home to nobody. Sunday was the worst. Sunday's built for families, isn't it? And I hadn't got one. I'd walk down to the shops just to have somewhere to walk to. That was my whole social life at the end there. A trip to the co-op for the sake of leaving the house. But my body was starting to hand the notices in. Knees gone, shoulder gone, back like a rusty gate every morning. 40 years of climbing and lifting and standing on cold steel in the London wet catches up with you all at once, it seems, like the bill lands in one go. And then, 2 years ago, standing in my own kitchen waiting for the kettle, I had a heart attack. I'll not dress it up. 1 minute I'm reaching for a tea bag, and the next I'm on the lino looking at the underneath of my own table thinking, well, this is a stupid way to go. I got lucky. Neighbor heard me come down, God love her. Ambulance, stents, the whole circus. And I ended up lying in a bed in the Princess Royal for the better part of a week, with nothing to do but stare at the ceiling and think. And here's the thing I thought about. My mum. My mum spent her last 4 years in a care home off the A23, out past Coulsdon. And I want to be careful how I say this, because the girls that worked there weren't bad girls. They were run off their feet and paid nothing. But that place. God. The smell of it, first thing. That boiled veg and bleach smell that got into your coat. The telly bolted up in the corner blaring some quiz show nobody was watching. And my mum, who raised 3 of us on a cleaner's wage and never once sat down, parked in a vinyl chair by a window that didn't open, waiting. That's the word. Waiting. She stopped being my mum in there. She became a thing that got fed and changed and turned. She stopped being a person. And lying in that hospital bed at 60, with the machine going beep next to me and no wife and no kids and a flat full of Carol's things, I did the sum. I did the honest sum. Who's going to be my neighbor hearing me hit the lino next time? Who visits me on a Sunday? Where do I end up? I knew exactly where I ended up. I ended up in a chair by a window that doesn't open, off the A23, waiting. And I thought, no, sod that. Not me. I have spent 40 years refusing to fall off things, and I am not going to spend my last years being turned like a Sunday roast in a place that smells of bleach. There has to be another way to grow old. There has to. That's where the Philippines comes into it. And I'll tell you exactly how, but I've got to back up a minute first. It was a lad off the site, funnily enough. Terry. Retired a few years before me, and every winter I'd see the odd photo pop up. Terry on a beach. Terry with a San Miguel the size of his head. Terry looking 20 years younger than the gray ghost I remembered shivering on scaffolds in February. And one of these photos, he sat outside some little place with a plate of grilled fish in front of him. And there's an old boy at the next table, proper old, in a wheelchair. And there's a young woman feeding him and laughing with him, and he's laughing back. Out in the sun. Part of things. Not hidden away. I couldn't stop looking at that photo. That old boy in the sun, with someone actually talking to him like he mattered. So I did what everyone my age does now. I got on the internet at 2 a.m, and I started reading. Cost of living in the Philippines. Retiring in the Philippines. And the numbers, mate, the numbers didn't make sense to my London brain. People living decent, a helper to cook and clean, a little place near the sea, all of it for less than what the council wanted off me for the flat. And more than the money, it was the other thing. Over and over, I read the same line from these expats. Out here, they look after their old. They don't shove them in a home. They keep them at home, in the family, in the light. I had about £100,000 put by, a lifetime of overtime and no holidays, and never once buying a car worth having. Plus the state pension coming. It wasn't a fortune, but out there, they were telling me, it was a life. A proper one. I booked a flight before I could talk myself out of it. Told myself it was just a look. Just a nose round. I wasn't going to do anything daft. Yeah. Just a look. I landed in Cebu first, and I'll be dead straight with you. The first 48 hours I nearly turned round and went home. The heat hits you like opening an oven. The traffic's a war. I stood outside that airport at midnight sweating through my shirt, with jeepneys blaring and diesel in my throat, and a bloke trying to sell me a SIM card. And I thought, Wayne, you daft old sod, what have you done? But I'd booked to go on to Dumaguete, down on Negros, because one of the forums swore blind it was the place for a man my age. Gentle, they called it. City of Gentle People. That's the actual slogan on the sign. Smaller, slower, university town, good hospital. So I got the little propeller plane down and, mate, it was like someone turned the volume down on the world. I got a room off the boulevard first, this long seafront where in the evening the whole town comes out to walk. Families, students, old couples, kids with balloons, the lot. Fish balls sizzling in oil on little carts, the man scooping them out with a bamboo skewer, and you dip them in a cup of sauce that'll take your head off. Vendors selling green mangoes with shrimp paste, which sounds horrible and is somehow lovely. A brass band of teenagers murdering some hymn down by the old church. And they'd say good evening to me. Strangers, an old British fella sweating in a golf shirt. And they'd nod and smile like I was meant to be there. Try that walking through Sydenham of an evening. Try it. You'd get looked at like you were casing the place. And I'll tell you the thing that undid me those first weeks. The thing I hadn't the words for at first. It was the noise of life. Where I'd come from, life happened behind closed doors and drawn curtains, everyone sealed in their own little box with the telly on. Out here it all spilled into the street. Kids playing basketball on a hoop nailed to a coconut tree at 9 at night. Neighbors shouting to neighbors across the lane. Somebody's nan holding court on a plastic stool. A whole family eating together on the floor of a house with the door wide open to the world. I'd been so alone for so long that just standing in the middle of all that racket felt like being let back into the human race. The heat I got used to quicker than I thought. Your bones like it. 40 years I'd ached in the London damp, and out here the ache just sort of let go. I'd sit on the boulevard at 6 with a cold red horse, watching the sun go down over the water, tricycles buzzing past, someone's karaoke drifting out from a side street murdering a Whitney number, and I'd feel my shoulders come down from round my ears for the first time in years. And the old people, that's what I kept clocking. You'd see them out. Grandmas at the market barking orders, granddads on the plastic chairs outside the Sorry Sorry store putting the world right. The very old ones out with the family at dinner, being fed, being included, part of the noise. Nobody hidden. Nobody parked by a window. I couldn't get it out of my head, the difference. Off the A23 we tidy our old people away like something to be ashamed of. Here they sat them right in the middle of everything. Now I found the expat bar quick enough. You always do. Little place off Rizal Boulevard, ceiling fans, football on a telly nobody watched, and a row of Western fellas of a certain age on the stools who'd clearly been there since it opened. That's where I met the crew. And I'll come back to them proper, because they matter to this story more than they'd like. But the short version is, first week, sat at that bar, I met a bloke called Dave. Big fella from Doncaster, red in the face, been out there 11 years. And Dave took one look at me, fresh off the plane, pink as a ham, and he laughed, and he said, "Let me guess, you're going to fall in love and buy somebody's mum a house." I said I wasn't out here for any of that. I'd buried my wife, I said. I'm just after a bit of sun and a bit of peace. And Dave laughed again, not unkindly, and he said, "That's what we all said, pal." I should have listened to Dave. Or, no, that's not right either. Because the other end of that same bar was a fella called Ronnie, Quiet Geordie, been out 15 years, and Ronnie had a wife called Weng, and a little house, and a life that anyone would have swapped for. So it wasn't as simple as listen to the miserable ones. It never is. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, I hadn't come for a woman. I came to work out whether an old man on his own could build himself a life out here that wasn't a slow death in a chair. And in that first month, God help me, I honestly thought I'd cracked it. I found the condo through a Canadian bloke at the bar. Little two-bed place in a low block, a 10-minute tricycle from the boulevard, tiled floors, a balcony, aircon in the bedroom that actually worked. 25,000 pesos a month, which is about 350 pounds, for a whole flat. In London, that gets you a cupboard with a shared bathroom. I stood on that balcony the first morning with a coffee looking out at the coconut palms, and I laughed out loud on my own like a mental patient. And the little things stacked up in a way I wasn't ready for. A woman came round the block doing laundry, proper hand-washed and pressed for buttons. There was a carinderia, one of these little family eateries, just down the lane off Real Street, and for maybe 80 pesos, about a quid, I got a plate of rice and adobo that a London gastropub would have charged me 15 for and got wrong. My money, which back home was slowly being nibbled to death by bills, out here it just stopped shrinking. It sat still. For the first time since Carol died, I wasn't watching the account and doing the maths. That carinderia is where I met her. Her name was Marilu. She helped run the place, her and an aunt, and she was, I don't know, 40, 41. Not a young girl. That mattered to me. I want you to know that. I'd read all the horror stories about the old fools and the 20-year-olds, and I'd thought, well, that's not me. I'm not that stupid. And a woman my own sort of age felt like proof I had my head screwed on. She had a kid, a daughter, 10 or 11, this sharp little thing always doing homework in the corner. And Marilu had this way about her. Warm, but not gushing. She'd rib me about my terrible Tagalog. She called me Tito Wayne, which means uncle, sort of. And she never once, in those first weeks, asked me for a thing. That's what got me, if I'm honest. She never asked. All the warnings I'd read were about women who ask, and here was one who wouldn't take extra when I tried to leave it, who'd wave my hand away, who seemed almost embarrassed when I paid her a compliment. She told me her husband had gone off to Manila years back and never come home. Left her with the girl. Said it plain, not looking for sympathy, just the facts of her life. And I thought, there's a woman who's had it hard and kept her dignity. My kind of person. I started going every day. For the food, I told myself. It was for the food. The expat lot clocked it before I did, of course. I mentioned her at the bar one night, casual, and Dave from Doncaster put his pint down slow and said, "Here we go." Said it to the whole bar. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a runner." And they all laughed, and I got the hump. Told him to leave it out. She wasn't like that. I wasn't like that. And Dave just gave me this look, this tired old look. "Mate," he said, "the good ones and the bad ones tell you the exact same story for the first 3 months. That's the whole trick. You can't tell the difference yet. None of us could." Ronnie, the quiet Geordie with the happy marriage, he didn't laugh. He just said, "Take your time, man. If she's straight, time won't hurt it. If she's not, time'll show you. Only thing that ever does." And I thought that was the sensible bit of advice in the room, and I even nodded along. And then I went and ignored the practical half of it, which is the taking your time part, because you don't feel like you're rushing. That's the thing nobody tells you. It never once felt like rushing. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. I want to paint her a bit more for you, so you understand it wasn't just some lonely old fool losing his head over a pretty face. It genuinely wasn't that. She wasn't a knockout, and she wasn't trying to be. She'd have her hair tied back, an apron on, a bit of flour on her cheek, ordering the aunt about and laughing at her own jokes. She worked hard, and I respect graft. I've spent my life around it. And she had this quickness to her. She'd clock my mood the second I sat down. Bad day with the knees, she'd have the good plastic chair out and a cold Coke down in front of me before I'd said a word. Nobody had paid that kind of attention to me since Carol. You don't know how starved of it you are until somebody does it. And then it's like water in the desert. And a man in a desert doesn't ask too many questions about where the water's coming from. The daughter, too. Angel, they called her, and I know how that sounds now. Bright as a button, top of her class, she'd show me her exercise books and ask me about London, about snow. She'd never seen snow. And I'd sit there explaining snow to a little girl in the tropics with a cold drink sweating on the table, and I'd think, this is nice. This is what I've been missing. This is a family shape, and I fit in it. That's what I was buying, though I didn't know I was buying anything yet. The shape of a family round a man who'd lost his. The money started so small, I want to laugh telling you. It started with phone load. 200 pesos, less than 3 quid, so she could message me because her data kept running out. That's where it starts for everyone, I reckon. Load. Then it was, the girls got a school project. Could I help with the printing? A couple of 100 pesos. Nothing. Then Marilu's tricycle to work. Then a bit toward the daughter's shoes for some school parade. Little bits. The kind of thing you'd do for anyone you liked. The kind of thing that would have been insulting to say no to. And here's where I've got to be fair. Because this is the part the bitter blokes at the bar never allow for. A lot of it was real. The girl really did have a school project. The shoes were really for a parade. I saw the photos. This little one beaming in a costume. The obligation Marilu had to her family. That was real too. And it's not a scam. It's how the whole country runs. They call it utang na loob, this debt of gratitude. You look after the ones who looked after you, and the eldest daughter carries the family on her back, and that's just the deal she was born into. When I understood that properly, it made me respect her more, not less. She was sending money to her own mother out in the province every single month before I ever came along. That wasn't a performance for the Kano. That was her life. But that understanding, that respect, it's also exactly the door they walk through. Because once you accept that helping the family is normal and good and cultural, well, where's the line then? There isn't one drawn on the floor. You have to draw it yourself. And I didn't draw mine anywhere near soon enough. Meeting the family was what did it, I think. She took me out to the province one Sunday, this jeepney ride into the hills, and her mother's house was a proper little bahay kubo, bamboo and tin, chickens under it, the works. And they treated me like a king. Killed a chicken. The mother held my hands and cried and thanked God for sending me, actual tears, and thanked me for being good to Marilu and the girl. And the whole clan, cousins, aunties, a granddad in the corner who they all fussed over, and I sat there in this poor little house full of noise and warmth, and I thought about my own flat in Sydenham, with the telly on all night, and Carol's coat by the door, and I very nearly cried myself. You want to know how they get you? That's how. Not with a scam. With exactly the thing you came 10,000 miles to find, a family, a place at the table, being wanted. I'd spent 2 years being a spare part nobody had room for, and these people sat me right in the middle and acted like I was a blessing, and whatever else was going on, and there was plenty going on I couldn't see, that feeling was the realest thing I'd felt since my wife died. And I noticed the old granddad in the corner of that house all through the day. He must have been 90. Couldn't do much, sat in a hammock chair by the window with a blanket over his knees, even in that heat. But he wasn't shoved off in a back room out of the way. He was right there in the middle of it all. The little ones climbed on him. Somebody was always passing him a bit of food, wiping his chin, telling him the gossip whether he followed it or not. When a song came on the radio, one of the aunties took his hands and sort of danced them about, and he grinned this toothless grin. And I sat there watching that old man being loved, out loud, in the open, and I thought of my mum off the A23 in that vinyl chair, and I had to look at my plate for a minute so nobody saw my face. Because there it was. The whole reason I'd got on the plane, playing out right in front of me in a bamboo house with chickens under the floor. So when the mother's health came up, I didn't think twice. It was the gallbladder. She needed an operation, and the public hospital was a horror show, wait lists and shared beds, and the decent place wanted 85,000 pesos up front. That's about 1,200 pounds. And Marilu didn't ask me, that's the thing. She was on the phone crying, trying to borrow it off relatives who had nothing. And I sat there listening, and I thought, I've got 100 grand in the bank doing nothing. And this woman's mother is going to suffer over 1,200 quid. What kind of man would I be? So I paid it. Course I did. And the relief on her face, the gratitude, the mother ringing me from her hospital bed to bless me down the phone. I felt 10 feet tall. I felt useful. Do you understand what I'm saying? I hadn't felt useful to a living soul in 2 years, and here I was, a man who could fix things, fixing something that actually mattered. It wasn't about the money. That's what none of the warnings ever prepare you for. It was never about the money. It was about being needed again. I told Dave at the bar, expecting a lecture, and I got one. 85 grand pesos for the mum's operation, he said, flat. Textbook. It's always the mum. It's always the operation. And I got proper angry with him this time, told him not everyone's a con, that just because his marriage went bad didn't mean the whole country was crooked. And there was real venom in it, on my side, because he was poking the one thing I didn't want poked. Ronnie, the happy one, he took me aside after, and he didn't tell me I was wrong. He just said, "Did you ask to see the hospital bill, pet? The actual bill, with her mam's name on it?" And I hadn't. Of course I hadn't. You don't ask a crying woman for a receipt. And he nodded like that was the whole answer, and it sort of was. But by then, I couldn't have stopped if I'd wanted to. And after that, it came steadier. The daughter, the sharp little one, she wanted to be a nurse. And out there, that's the golden ticket, the nursing degree, because a Filipino nurse can go work in the Gulf, or in Britain even, and lift the whole family out. So when the college fees came up, 60-odd thousand pesos a semester, about 900 quid, I thought, well, now here's something worth doing. This isn't a fella buying a woman's affection. This is me giving a bright kid a future. I paid the first semester, then the second. 130,000 pesos over the year, near enough 1,800 pounds, and I felt good about every peso of it. I'd never had a kid to do anything for. Now I did. Then it was the little business. Marilu wanted out of the carinderia, wanted her own sari-sari store, one of these little front-of-house shops that sell everything from a single cigarette to a sachet of shampoo, and it's a proper thing. A real living. Women run their whole families on them. She had it all costed. Stock, the shelving, a chest freezer for the ice and the cold drinks. 250,000 pesos to set it up right. About 3,500 pounds. And I looked at the numbers. And I'm a practical man. I've priced up plenty of jobs in my time. And it added up. It genuinely added up. So I put it in. Not as a gift, we agreed, as a sort of family investment for her and the girl's future, which is the future I was starting to picture myself in. And I want to be honest about the warnings, because I got plenty, and I can't pretend I didn't. It wasn't just Dave. There was a whole chorus of them at that bar, and they had a name for what I was doing. They called it getting the treatment. One of them, a Scottish fella called Tam, he'd lost a house and half his pension to a woman in Cebu, and he'd say to me, slow, over his beer, "It's na that they don't feel anything for ye, son. It's that the feeling and the fleecing live in the same person at the same time, and you'll go mad trying to work out which is which." And I thought that was just a broken man's poetry at the time. I know better now. That was the truest thing anybody said to me in 3 years. But here's the trouble with the bar. For every Tam and every Dave telling me it was all a con, there was the sight of Ronnie going home to Weng, happy as a sandboy. So the warnings canceled themselves out in my head. See, if it were always a disaster, I'd have run. But it isn't always. Sometimes it's the best thing that ever happened to a man. And that little bit of maybe, that's the gap they get through. You look at the happy one and you think, why not me? And you stop listening to the sad ones, because who wants to end up like them? Because that's what had happened, see, somewhere in there. Without a single day I could point to and say, that's when I'd stopped being a man having a look at the Philippines, and I'd become a man building a life with a woman in it. She'd stay over at the condo. She cooked. The girl did her homework at my table. On a good evening, the three of us on the boulevard with ice cream, I'd feel like I had a family again, an actual family, at 61 years of age, when I'd written that whole idea off for dead. And you cannot put a price on that, which is exactly the problem. Because they can, and they did. And I'll tell you the honest truth. Right through all of that, there was a little voice. There always is. I just kept turning the telly up on it. The big one, the one that should have woken me up, was the house. Marilou's mother's place out in the province, the little bamboo and tin one. It flooded every rainy season, and the tin roof was going, and it wasn't safe for the old ones. And the plan came up, gentle at first. A dream, she'd talk about, of building a proper concrete house on the family land. Somewhere, the granddad could see out his days in the dry. Somewhere, for all of them. And she'd say it, wistful, not asking, always careful never to quite ask. And I'd lie there at night, doing sums I had no business doing. Because I'd started thinking, well, if I'm going to end my days out here, and if this is my family now, then a solid house on the land. That's not money thrown away. That's my own future roof, isn't it? That's where I'll be the old granddad, in the corner they fuss over, in the sun, part of things, instead of off the A23 waiting to die. I'd sold myself the whole picture. The house was the last brick in it. A concrete house out there, done properly. They were talking 1.5 million pesos. That's 21,000 pounds. A fifth of everything I had, gone into a building, on land I could never legally own, because a foreigner can't own land in the Philippines, not an inch of it. And I knew that. I'd read it 100 times, and I'd sat at that bar and heard Dave say the word to some other poor mug. It'll be in her name, son. Always in her name. And I'd still, God help me, started moving money. I didn't do the whole 1.5 million, thank Christ. But I started it. I put in 400,000 pesos to break ground and get the foundations and the posts up, about 5,500 pounds. Handed over in stages, In cash? To a cousin who was the builder? No contract. Nothing on paper. Because who asks family for a contract? It'd be an insult. And I told myself the rest would come when I saw the walls going up. That's when the cracks started. Not big ones. Hairlines. But once you see one, you start seeing them everywhere. The building was slow. Painfully slow. Photos of the same 4 posts for weeks. And when I asked, there was always a reason. The cement price, the rain, the cousin had another job on. Fine. Maybe. Buildings slow everywhere. I've been in the trade. I know that much. But I know a bit too much about the trade, that's the thing. And the numbers on that job never sat right with me. 400,000 pesos should have had walls up, block laid, a roof frame at least. And all I ever saw was posts and a slab and a lot of reasons. If a foreman had shown me that, on a London site, I'd have had him off the job by dinner time. But you don't treat your girlfriend's cousin like a bent foreman, do you? You tell yourself it's different here. You make the excuse for them that you'd never make for anybody at work. But then, the daughter let something slip one evening at the condo. Offhand, kids do. She mentioned a Tito June. A couple of times. Tito June took them here. Tito June fixed the moto. And I said, all casual, "Oh, who's Tito June?" And this little sharp girl who'd never been anything but chatty went quiet. Just went quiet and looked at her homework. 10 years old, and she knew to go quiet. And Marilou's phone. She'd always been relaxed with it, left it on the table, and now it lived face down, and it buzzed at odd hours, and she started stepping onto the balcony to take calls, pulling the door to. Little things. Any one of them? Nothing. A man imagines things, I told myself. You're a jealous old fool, I told myself. She's got a business now. Of course, the phone's busy. There was a fortnight where she was harder to reach. Sick relative, she said, back in the province, and the messages came slower and shorter. And I noticed I was doing this thing where I'd draft a message and delete it because I didn't want to seem like I was checking up. Since when did I tiptoe round anybody? 40 years I said exactly what I thought to hard men on scaffolds, and now I was editing texts to a woman, so I wouldn't upset her. That should have told me something about who had the power in the thing. It didn't. Not yet. Dave saw it on my face at the bar. He didn't gloat, to his credit. He just said, quiet, "Slowing down, is it? The messages." And I didn't answer. And he nodded and said, "When the money's flowing steady, they've got time for you. When something's off, they get busy. Sick relatives, bad signal, busy, busy, busy." He took a drink. "I hope I'm wrong, Wayne. I've been wrong before. But go and have a look for yourself before you put another peso in that house. Just go and look." And I decided he was a bitter old man, who'd been burned once, and now saw ghosts everywhere. I decided that, so I wouldn't have to go and look. Because some part of me already knew that if I looked, I'd see it, and I wasn't ready to lose the family. Not the woman, even. The family. The place at the table. I'd have paid almost anything to keep pretending a bit longer. Almost anything. That's the close call. Right there. Almost. I didn't go looking to catch her. I want that on record. I'm not the type to follow anyone about. What happened was ordinary as anything, which is somehow worse. It was a Saturday, and I'd gone into Robinson's, the mall in town, to buy a fan for the condo and get out of the heat for an hour. And I was up on the second level by the food court, and I looked down over the rail into the ground floor, near the Jollibee, and there she was. Marilou. In a dress I'd not seen, a nice one. And the daughter, my little nurse-to-be, in a new outfit, laughing. And there was a man, Filipino, My sort of age, maybe a bit younger. Arm round Marilou easy, comfortable. The way you only are with someone you've been with a long time. And he crouched down and said something to the girl, and she laughed and grabbed his hand. Natural as breathing. The way that girl had never once grabbed mine. And the three of them walked into the Jollibee together like the most ordinary family in the Philippines. Because that's what they were. A family. Just not mine. I stood at that rail, with a boxed electric fan under my arm, and I couldn't move. I want to tell you my heart did something dramatic, but it didn't. It went very quiet, actually. Very cold, and very quiet. The way it goes when you're up high, and something goes wrong and there's no time for panic. Only for seeing exactly what's in front of you. And what was in front of me, 40 feet down by a Jollibee, was every single thing Dave had said, standing there in a nice dress holding another man's hand. And do you know what I did first? The very first thing, before any of the hurt landed? I started making excuses for her. Even then, even looking right at it. Maybe he really is a cousin. Maybe her brother. Maybe I've got it wrong. My mind went scrambling round like a rat in a bucket, trying to find a way for what I was seeing to not mean what it meant. 40 years reading people, and stood at that rail I was still, right up to the last second, trying to unsee it. That's how deep in I was. That's how much I didn't want to lose them. And that scared me more than anything, if I'm honest, that even with the proof laid out 40 feet below me, some part of me was still hunting for a reason to keep paying. The husband from Manila who never came back. Or a boyfriend. I never did find out which, and it doesn't matter. What mattered was, he wasn't new. You could see it in every line of them. He'd been there the whole time. The whole time I was paying for gallbladders and nursing fees and pouring $5.5 grand into concrete posts on family land, this fella had been there. Tito Jun, I'd have put money on it. Probably the one the moto got fixed for. Maybe the one on the balcony calls. Maybe the one the house was really being built for. I didn't go down. I want you to know that, because it's the one thing in this whole sorry tale I'm actually proud of. I didn't go charging down there to make a scene, to shout, to demand, to give her the chance to cry and explain and reel me back in, because she would have. That was her gift, and my weakness. I just watched them go into the Jollibee. And then, I put the fan back on the shelf, funnily enough, didn't even want it anymore, and I walked out of that mall into the heat, and I got a tricycle back to the condo, and I sat on the balcony where I'd laughed out loud with joy that first morning. And I didn't feel a thing for a long time. And then I felt everything. And I'll not describe that part. A man's entitled to keep some things. The next day, I did the sums. Properly. Cold. The way I'd price a job. The load, the shoes, the school bits. The mother's operation, $85,000. The girl's college, $130. The sari store, $250. The house, $400,000 into the ground. All the little bits in between. The flights out to the province. The pasalubong gifts you're expected to bring. The meals. The this. The that. Add it all up, and I'd put the better part of $1 million pesos through my hands into that family over about a year. Near enough 15,000 pounds. 15 grand. I sat there and made myself look at it. And here's the thing. Here's the thing that saved me. In a way. 15,000 pounds is a lot of money. It's a year of somebody's life on a London wage. It hurt. It still hurts, if I let it. But I had about 100,000 pounds when I came, and my pension was still landing every month regular as the tide, and the condo was 350 quid, and the truth I had to sit with was this. It could have been so much worse. If I'd handed over the full $1.5 million for that house. If I'd married her, which we'd started, God help me, to talk about. If I'd done the marriage visa and tangled myself up legal with a woman who, for all I knew, was still legally married to that fella in the first place. Because there's no divorce out here, only annulment. And half the arrangements you see are built on a marriage that never legally ended. If I'd done any of that, I'd have been finished, cleaned out, and trapped, and 62. Instead, I caught it at 15. An expensive lesson, but a lesson I could afford. Dave, bitter old Dave, he'd tried to hand it to me for free about 6 times, and I wouldn't take it. So I paid 15 grand for the same information. That's on me. Every penny of that is on me, and I won't pretend otherwise. I saw her one more time. I went to the Carinderia in daylight, calm, and I told her I knew. I didn't shout. I just said I'd seen her at Robinson's with him and the girl, and that I understood now. And she did exactly what I knew she'd do. The tears came, and it was, "He's just a cousin, Wayne. He's nothing. You don't understand." And then when that didn't land, it was anger. How could I accuse her? After everything, didn't I love the girl? And I stood there watching a performance I'd once have bought every ticket to, and I felt, more than anything, tired. And a bit sad for her even. Because some of it, I still believe, some of it had been real. That's the cruel part. It's never all a lie. If it were all a lie, you'd spot it in a week. It's the real bits threaded through that keep you paying. I told her the house money stopped that day. The college, I'd see the girl through the year I'd promised, because the girl never asked for any of it, and I wasn't going to punish a kid for her mother. And I meant that, and I kept it, and I'll tell you the little one got her year, and she's still on that nursing course, last I heard, and I hope to God she finishes it and gets out and up, because none of the mess was her doing. But everything else was done. And I turned round and walked out into the heat, and my legs were like water. But I walked, and I didn't look back. And I never went to that Carinderia again. For a few weeks after, I'll be straight with you, I was in a bad way. I didn't go to the bar because I couldn't stand the thought of Dave being right to my face, even kindly. I sat on that balcony, and I drank a bit more San Miguel than a man with stents ought to, and I ran it all back, every stage, every payment, every excuse I'd made, and I called myself every kind of fool there is. 62 years old, and taken in like a schoolboy. That's a hard thing to sit with when you've spent your whole life being the one who couldn't be had. My pride hurt worse than my wallet, and my wallet hurt plenty. But I came out the other side of it quicker than I thought I would, and I think it's because of what I compared it to. I'd sit there feeling sorry for myself, and then I'd remember the alternative I'd escaped, the real one, the chair off the A23, and suddenly 15 grand and a bruised ego looked like a bargain. I hadn't lost my life. I'd lost a chunk of money, and a fantasy I'd never really had in the first place. Those are survivable. Some men don't get to say that. And the strangest thing, under all the hurt, there was this other thing rising up. Relief. Pure relief. Like when you finally get both feet back on solid boards after a bad moment up top. I'd got out. Lighter by 15 grand and about 10 years of hope. But I'd got out with my house and my pension and my name. And most men in these stories, the ones Dave could reel off, they don't. They lose the lot. I'd been lucky. Or not lucky. I'd finally, one time, at the last possible minute, looked. That's all it takes. Looking. I just left it terribly late. So here's where I've ended up, and here's why, after everything I've just told you, I'm still sitting here in the Philippines telling you to come. Because that's the bit people expect me to get wrong, isn't it? They expect the man who lost 15 grand to a woman out here to be bitter, to tell you it's all a nest of vipers, come home, trust no one. And I want to be really clear, because it matters. The woman was the mistake. The country was not the mistake. Those are two completely different things, and the bitter blokes at the bar spend their whole lives mixing them up. Look at Dave. 11 years out there, and he'd tell any new arrival the whole place was crooked, every woman a thief, and he was right often enough to feel clever. But Dave was a miserable, lonely man who'd let one bad marriage turn into a life sentence of sitting on a stool being right about everybody. I didn't want to become Dave. Being right and alone is still just alone. And then there was Ronnie. 15 years, married to Weng, and I went round their little place after all this and sat in their yard. And there was Weng's old mother living right there with them. Ancient thing, blind as a bat, sat in the shade being brought her food and fussed over and talked to. Part of the day, part of the family, till the end. And Ronnie caught me looking at her, and he knew exactly what I was thinking, because I'd told him about my mum, off the A23, and he just said, "Aye, they don't hide them here, man. Old age isn't a shameful thing to them. That's the whole difference, that is." And it is. That's the whole difference. And I had a long think after about why I fell for it when I'm not a man who falls for things. And it wasn't the sun, and it wasn't a pretty face. It was that I'd arrived out here with a hole in me the exact size and shape of a family, and she'd handed me one that fit. You can warn a man about money all day long. You can teach him every red flag in the book. But you cannot inoculate a lonely man against being wanted. That's the real trap, and it's not a Filipino trap. It's a human one. And I'd have been just as easy meat for it in Sydenham if anyone in Sydenham had bothered. That's the bit I had to own. The country didn't do it to me. My own loneliness did most of the work, and she just read it, the way I used to read a sight, in about 5 minutes flat. Because here's what didn't change through any of it. I'm 62. My knees are still gone. My heart's still running on stents and borrowed time. And out here, on my pension, in that condo, I have a life that a man in my position back home simply cannot buy. I've got a woman comes in 3 days a week now, older lady, Nane Cora, widow herself, all above board, proper arrangement, agreed rate, no romance and no nonsense, and she cooks and cleans, and we don't half have a laugh. And if I go down on the lino again, she's there. 15,000 pesos a month I pay her, about 200 pounds, and she says it's the best job she's had, and I believe her. And that's the honest version of the thing I'd been trying to buy the crooked way. Company and care, out in the open, paid for fare, nobody pretending it's love. It works. It's dignified for the both of us. When I had a chest scare a few months back, the hospital in town, Silliman, had me seen and sorted for a fraction of what you'd think. Doctors with time to actually talk to me, not glancing at a screen and hurrying me out the door in 7 minutes flat. A young doctor sat on the edge of my bed, actually sat down, and drew me a little picture of what my heart was up to and asked about my life. And Nanay Cora sat outside the whole time with a bag of Lanzone's fruit, ready for when they let me out. I lay there thinking, back home, I'd have been on a trolley in a corridor for 11 hours. Here I had somebody drawing me pictures and somebody else waiting with fruit. That's not nothing. At my age, that's very close to everything. And it's not just when things go wrong, it's the ordinary days. It's the tricycle drivers who know my name, It's the girl at the bakery who puts my 2 ensaimadas aside because she knows I like them fresh. It's Nanay Cora singing to herself in the kitchen while a bad film plays on the telly and the rain hammers the roof of an afternoon. It's a slower kind of life, and when you're an old man with a dodgy ticker, slow is exactly what you want. Back home, everything moved too fast for me and had no room in it for me. Here the pace and the warmth fit a man my age like a glove. I've got the boulevard of an evening. I've got Ronnie and a couple of the decent ones for a beer. I've got sun on my bad shoulder every single morning. And I have not once, sat in a chair by a window that doesn't open, waiting. Compare that. Honestly, compare it. Back home, on my own, 62 with a dodgy heart and no family, I was one more fall away from that home off the A23. The boiled veg and the bleach and the telly bolted to the wall, being turned, stopping being a person. That was the actual future waiting for me. That was the real one. And out here, even after getting my fingers burned to the tune of 15 grand, I am a person. I'm Tito Wayne. People know my name at the market. I matter to somebody. At 62, that's the whole ball game. So would I warn you? Course I would. Take everything from my story you can. Go slow, slower than feels natural, because it never feels like rushing. Watch the money and draw your line on the floor early, before your heart's involved, and write it in something that won't wipe off. Don't buy the mum a house. Don't put money in the ground you can't own. When the messages slow down and the sick relatives pile up, go and look. Go and actually look. Don't do what I did and decide not to because you're scared of what you'll see. And find yourself a Ronnie, not a Dave. There's both out here, propping up the same bar, and you get to choose which one you turn into. But don't you dare let my 15 grand talk you out of the life. That'd be the real waste. One wrong woman is not a country. And this country, for an old man with more years behind him than ahead, this country will let you grow old in the warm, out in the middle of things, treated like you're still a human being, right up to the end, which is a damn sight more than I was offered back home. I'm 62. I've got a good few years left if the heart holds, and I intend to spend every one of them in the sun with people who know my name. Not off the A23, not waiting. Whatever you do, don't let them put you in that chair. Come here instead. Just come with your eyes open. That's all. Come with your eyes wide open. That was Wayne, 62, from the southeast of London, telling us his story from a balcony a long way from Sydenham. There's a hard thing tucked inside what Wayne just shared, and it's worth sitting with. He lost real money to someone he trusted, and he'll be the first to tell you the fault was partly his own for not looking sooner. But notice where he landed. Not in bitterness, and not in blame for a whole country and its people, but in something clearer than either. That the wrong person is not the same as the wrong place. That family obligation out here is often real and beautiful, and can still, in the wrong hands, be turned against you. And that growing old with your name known and the sun on your back beats the alternative he'd been staring at back home. Take the warnings. Go slow. Ask the hard questions. Protect what's yours. But take the hope as well, because he earned the right to offer you both. Thank you for spending this time with us. If Wayne's story moved you, or if you've lived a piece of it yourself, tell us in the comments, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Look after each other out there. This has been Inside the Philippines Journals.